Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we are taking a deep dive into time management.
Time management, yeah.
And I know it's something all of our listeners are super interested in.
Oh, yeah.
We've got three really good sources here.
Okay.
We've got 20 time management tips from American University, 10 strategies for better time management from the University of Georgia, and then one that's specifically focused on students, time management tips for students. So,
Interesting.
yeah, let's see what we can pull out of these.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I was surprised by is that a lot of the advice about time management starts with kind of a paradox.
Ooh, okay, tell me more.
Well, the University of Georgia's source points out that you can't actually manage time.
Right.
Like, time just keeps ticking, right?
Yeah.
What you manage are the events that happen within that time.
I see. So it's about making decisions about what we do with the time that we have.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. And I noticed that at least a couple of these sources mentioned time tracking.
Yeah.
Is that where this comes into play, like actually managing those events?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. So both American University and the University of Georgia really stress that you have to understand where your time is actually going before you can really make changes.
Mm.
And the University of Georgia's source suggests even going so far as trying what they call a time log, where you track your activities in 15-minute intervals for a week or two.
Whoa, 15 minutes, that's pretty intense.
Yeah.
Is it really necessary to be that granular?
I think it can be. It's like budgeting. You wouldn't want to create a budget without knowing where your money is going.
Sure.
And it's kind of the same thing with time. You might be surprised, actually, by how much time you're spending on certain activities. And then that awareness can be really powerful when it comes to actually making changes.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So we know where the time is going. How do we start to make better choices about how we spend the time that we have? I know American University and UGA both had some ideas about this.
Yeah, and I think one of the key concepts that they both emphasize is prioritization. In fact, the University of Georgia introduces a really helpful tool called the Time Management Matrix.
The time management matrix. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, it's all about understanding the difference between what's important and what's urgent.
Hmm.
So imagine a four-square grid.
Okay.
And let's say you have a project that's due tomorrow and you haven't even started it yet.
Oh, I can feel the stress already.
Right. So that would be a task that's both important and urgent.
Yeah.
And that would go in the top left quadrant of the matrix. But then you also have things like planning for next month's presentation or learning a new skill that could benefit your career down the line.
Yeah, those are important, but maybe not quite as urgent.
Right, exactly. So those tasks would go in the top right quadrant, so important but not urgent.
Okay.
And here's where things get tricky, I think, because it's really easy to let the urgent things take over,
Oh, yeah.
even if they're not actually that important.
Like checking emails every 5 minutes,
Exactly.
even if it's just a newsletter or something.
Yeah, precisely. So that's where the other two quadrants of the matrix come in. The bottom left is for things that are urgent but not important.
Okay.
Think of those as potential distractions or tasks that you could potentially delegate.
Okay.
And then the bottom right is for those things that are neither important nor urgent. So those are the things that we really want to try to eliminate from our lives.
So things that are just wasting our time.
Exactly. So by using this time management matrix, you can start to identify what really deserves your attention and what can be minimized or eliminated.
So it's not just about getting things done, it's about getting the right things done.
Exactly. And that's where we can start talking about some of those specific time management strategies.
Okay, let's get into some of those strategies.
So all three sources have a bunch of ideas, but I think the one that really stood out to me was this concept of eating the big frog first.
Eating the big frog. That's an interesting analogy.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
It comes from the University of Georgia, and the idea is to tackle your most daunting or unpleasant task first thing in the morning. Get it out of the way, and you feel that sense of accomplishment, and it'll carry you through the rest of the day.
Yeah, it's like ripping off a Band-Aid. Just do it and get it over with.
Yeah.
But what if my big frog is a really big frog, like a project that just feels overwhelming?
Well, the UGA source also had another great tip for that, which is to break down those huge tasks into smaller, more manageable chunks.
Okay, yeah.
Kind of like the snowball method, right? You start with a small snowball, and it gradually gets bigger and bigger.
Yeah, that's a good way to make things feel less overwhelming.
Right.
Now, the American University source talked about the 80-20 rule.
Ah, yes, the 80-20 rule.
Tell me about that one.
Also known as the Pareto principle, it suggests that 20% of our efforts often yield 80% of our results. So the key is to identify those high-impact activities and really focus on those.
So working smarter, not harder.
Exactly. And I think that brings us to another really important aspect of time management, which is understanding how our personal energy levels and rhythms play into our productivity.
Yeah, that's a great point.
You know, some of us are morning people, some of us are night owls. It doesn't make sense to try to force everyone to follow the same schedule.
Totally.
So the University of Georgia source really emphasizes the importance of knowing your own peak productivity times and then actually scheduling your most challenging tasks for when you're feeling most alert and energized.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I think that's a great place to stop for now. Listener, what is resonating with you so far? Are you a big frog first person?
Yeah. Or maybe the 80-20 rule is really calling your name.
Keep those thoughts in mind as we get into part 2.
Absolutely. See you there.
We'll be back soon.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm excited to dig into some more of these practical strategies.
Me too. So we've talked about some of those big picture concepts like the time management matrix and the 80-20 rule.
All right.
But let's get into some of those nitty-gritty everyday tips for time management.
Okay, sounds good.
I know one thing that stood out to me in the American University source was this idea of minimizing interruptions, which I don't know about you, but
Oh,
it
huge.
feels like I'm constantly getting interrupted these days.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the reality of the world we live in.
It is.
But the American University source suggests being proactive about it, like actually blocking off times in your day when you just can't be interrupted.
Oh, I like that.
Unless it's a true emergency.
Yeah. Like a designated focus time. Do you ever do that?
I try to.
Yeah.
You know, turning off phone notifications, silencing email pings. It's like you're building a fortress of concentration.
It is. I love that. And, you know, it's funny because the student-specific guide also talks a lot about eliminating distractions.
Right.
But even though those tips are geared towards students, they really apply to anyone
They do, absolutely.
who's trying to get work done.
Whether you're working on a big project or just reading a book.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So they suggest things like finding a quiet study space,
Yep.
putting your phone on Do Not Disturb, and even using noise-canceling headphones.
Yeah, those are great. And all of that kind of ties into this bigger picture of understanding your personal work style and setting yourself up for success.
Exactly. And speaking of setting yourself up for success, the University of Georgia's source had some really good points about scheduling.
Yes.
Talking about, you know, are you a morning person or a night owl?
That's so important. And they suggest actually scheduling your most challenging tasks for those times when you feel most alert and energized.
I am definitely a morning person.
Oh, good to know.
Like, I get my best work done
Yeah.
before lunch. But I also know if I try to just power through and keep working,
Uh-huh.
I eventually hit a wall.
Yeah, we all do. And that's where another key piece of advice comes in, which is to actually schedule breaks. And not just breaks for rest, but breaks for things you enjoy.
Right.
The University of Georgia source really emphasized scheduling time for things that bring you joy and help you recharge.
It's about having that balance
It is.
between, you know, work, rest, and play.
Exactly, yeah. It's about designing a life that feels fulfilling, not just busy. And sometimes that means getting a little bit creative with how we manage all of our responsibilities.
You're talking about delegation.
I am.
That's something the UGA source talks about as well.
Yes, and I think it's something that a lot of people struggle with.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I know I do. I often feel like it's just easier to do things myself
Right.
than try to explain it to someone else.
I totally get that. It's a common feeling. But the UGA source makes this really important point that delegation is not about shirking responsibility. It's about leveraging your time and skills more strategically.
Yeah. So it's about looking at what you have to get done and figuring out what other people could potentially help you with.
Exactly. So you can focus on those things that you're best at.
I like it.
They even go so far as to suggest the idea of buying time, like outsourcing tasks.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Like hiring someone to clean your house or getting a virtual assistant.
Exactly. Yeah. So it might seem counterintuitive, But sometimes spending a little bit of money can actually save you a significant amount of time and energy in the long run.
That's a really good way to think about it.
Okay.
Now, let's talk about procrastination.
Yeah.
Because I know that's something a lot of people
Oh, yeah, me too.
struggle with.
Huge.
And we talked about that eating the big frog first idea.
Right.
But what about those times when even that just feels totally overwhelming?
Well, the UGA source also suggested breaking down those large tasks into smaller, more manageable chunks.
Okay.
It's kind of like the snowball method,
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
where you start with a small task and gradually build momentum.
Yeah, it's like that old saying, how to eat an elephant.
What's that?
One bite at a time.
That's a good one.
And let's not forget all those little time wasters that can really creep into our day.
Oh, right.
All three of these sources had some tips on minimizing those.
Yeah, like American University talked about minimizing interruptions. The student guide talked about creating that distraction-free study space. But the UGA source, they really went all in on this,
They did.
didn't they?
They did.
They had strategies for everything from managing your email effectively to setting boundaries with unexpected visitors.
Wow.
They even talked about making the most of meetings and being more efficient with family obligations.
Wait, minimizing time spent on family obligations. I don't know about that one.
I know, it sounds a little harsh, but it's not about neglecting your family. It's about being more organized and intentional so you can maximize the quality time you do have with them.
Oh, okay. So it's about streamlining those logistical things
Exactly.
so that you can be more present with your loved ones.
Exactly. And then, of course, all the sources really highlight the importance of managing our screen time,
Yes.
which is a big time waster for many of us these days.
Yeah, for sure. So they suggest things like setting time limits on certain apps, utilizing those built-in features on our phones and computers that let us track and limit usage,
Yeah.
and even using things like blue light filters and grayscale mode to reduce eye strain.
And they remind us that taking those breaks from our devices is crucial for our well-being, both physical and mental.
It is.
Yeah.
I feel like I spend way too much time on my phone sometimes,
Yeah,
and it doesn't make me feel good.
I hear that. Yeah, it's a challenge we all face in this digital age.
It is.
Uh.
Now, speaking of challenges, there's one time management myth that the UGA source debunked that I found really interesting. Multitasking.
Yeah, the myth of multitasking.
Tell me more about that.
Right. So research has actually shown that trying to do multiple things at once actually makes us less productive. Our brains just aren't wired to focus effectively on multiple complex tasks simultaneously.
So it's like trying to juggle too many balls at once.
It is, and eventually you're going to drop something.
Right.
So instead of trying to do everything at once, they recommend focusing on one task at a time, minimizing those distractions,
Right.
and really giving that one task your full attention.
So quality over quantity.
Exactly. And finally, all of our sources really emphasize the importance of self-care for effective time management.
That's such a good point. It's so easy to get caught up in the hustle and forget to take care of ourselves.
It is. So they remind us that getting enough sleep, eating healthy foods, and exercising regularly can actually boost our energy levels
Uh-huh.
and improve our focus.
Yeah, it's like that idea of putting on your own oxygen mask first before assisting others.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
You can't pour from an empty cup.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they encourage us to schedule in time for relaxation and activities that we enjoy, even if it's just for a few minutes each day.
Right. It's about creating that sustainable lifestyle
Yes.
that supports our well-being, physical, mental, emotional.
Well said. I think that's a great transition into our final part of this deep dive, where we're going to be reflecting on the bigger picture and putting all these ideas together.
I like it.
But before we move on, listener, we would love to hear from you. What's been resonating with you from what we've talked about so far?
Yeah. Are there any tips or strategies that you're feeling inspired to try out in your own life? Hold on to those thoughts as we go into our final reflections in part 3.
Welcome back, everyone. We've covered a lot of ground in our deep dive into time management.
We have a lot of good stuff.
We talked about the time management matrix,
Right.
the 80-20 rule,
Yeah.
all those little tips and tricks
Uh-huh.
that can really make a difference in our daily lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I want to shift our focus now to the bigger picture.
Okay.
It's not just about those individual strategies.
Right.
It's how it all fits together to create a more fulfilling and intentional life.
I like that.
And I remember the University of Georgia source had a really thought-provoking question about this.
Oh, what was that?
They asked, are you accomplishing the tasks that are most important in your life?
That is a good question.
It's so easy to get caught up in the day-to-day
Yeah.
and lose sight of what really matters.
You get swept away.
You do. It's
Yeah.
like, Are we so busy climbing the ladder of success that we forget to check if it's leaning against the right wall?
It's so true.
Yeah.
And I think that's where this concept of values comes in.
Mm-hmm.
If we're not clear on our values, then it's really easy for our priorities to get out of whack.
Okay, I see the connection here. So if somebody really values spending time with their family,
Right.
but they're constantly working late,
Yeah.
that would be an example of a values conflict.
That's a perfect example. And, when our actions are out of sync with our values,
Huh.
it can lead to a lot of stress, dissatisfaction, even burnout.
That makes sense. So how do we start to bring those things into alignment?
Hmm.
Our values and how we're actually spending our time.
Well, I think first we have to identify what our core values are. What are those things that really matter most to us?
For some people, it might be family. For others, it might be creativity,
Right.
health, personal growth, something else entirely.
Right. Everyone's different. But once
Yeah.
you have a good understanding of your values,
Yeah.
then you can start to look at how you're actually spending your time.
And that's where that time tracking comes into play.
It's like, where is your time really going?
Yeah.
And are there any areas where you're out of alignment with those values that you've identified?
And then we can start to make adjustments.
You got it. To our schedules, to our habits.
Maybe saying no to some things.
Right. Maybe delegating some tasks
Yeah.
that are draining your energy.
Or making time for those activities that really bring us joy.
Yes. Nourish our souls.
Exactly. I know this can sound kind of overwhelming.
It can.
Like, oh my gosh, I got to identify my values, track my time, and then make adjustments.
It's a lot. Yeah.
But I have a feeling the payoff is worth it.
I think so too, because when we're living in alignment with our values, it creates the sense of purpose and direction.
Yeah. It makes you feel better.
It does.
Like you're moving forward in the right direction.
And that sense of purpose can really fuel our motivation and help us stay focused on what truly matters.
It's about living with intention
Yes.
and not just constantly reacting to whatever's in front of us.
That's really well said.
And it brings us back to that final thought-provoking question from the University of Georgia. Now that you have all of these tools and these insights, what one change will you make to reclaim control of your time?
That's a good one to ponder, isn't it?
It is.
Maybe it's something small, like setting aside 15 minutes every day to plan your schedule,
Yeah.
or identifying one task that you can delegate.
Or maybe it's something bigger, like having a conversation with your boss about your workload,
Right.
or setting some boundaries with family.
I like it. The important thing is to take action, even if it's just one small step.
Absolutely, because those small steps can lead to big changes over time.
That's right. And, as you embark on this time management journey, remember that you're not alone. We all have the same 24 hours in a day.
We do. But with the awareness, the intention, and these strategies that we've talked about, I really believe that all of us can become masters of our time
I agree.
and create lives that feel both productive and fulfilling.
So go forth and conquer your time.
We are cheering you on every step of the way.
Absolutely.
Until next time, keep diving deep.